Deus ex machina. It's a term that you will often hear thrown around by many budding critics on the internet. It's successfully entered even the most common analytical vocabulary, and even your friends at home might throw that word around. But, as with every cool sounding term, it is often used incorrectly. It's not all that uncommon for it to be tossed around at anything without any rhyme or reason or any real explanation. This includes one of my favorite stories of all time, which will be the topic of this video. But let's first determine what a Deus ex machina actually is. The term comes from ancient Greek and can be translated as God from the machine or God through machine. The term was coined by a convention of Greek theater. Actors playing the role of gods were usually brought onto the stage in a magical, divine manner with the help of trapdoors or cranes, in short, machines. This would often happen towards the end of an act, and the gods would generally use their divine power to solve whatever problem the story had run into. The use of this device is accredited to Euripides, a tragedian stage writer who utilized the Deus ex machina in over half of his plays, one even including a chariot carried by dragons being sent by the sun god to abduct the heroine of his play Medea into safety, ending the story. From this origin, the term evolved further and further until it received its modern, more commonly known definition. A plot device whereby a seemingly unsolvable problem in a story is suddenly and abruptly resolved by an unexpected and seemingly unlikely occurrence, typically so much so as to seem contrived. Its function can be to resolve an otherwise irresolvable plot situation, to surprise the audience, to bring the tale to a happy ending, or act as a comedic device. So, essentially, it's an overly convenient, unlikely, and unpredictable perfect solution to an unsolvable problem. It is a quick eureka for the story that essentially solves everything. And while we can have an entirely different discussion about whether or not this device is inherently bad, I think it's fair to establish for this video today that using something like this haphazardly can be very detrimental to a story, as it brings a story to a sudden, contrived, and unsatisfying conclusion. So this is a device that has to be used with care, and often isn't. Now we have that out of the way, let's talk about why Gold Experience Requiem from Golden Wind is not a Deus ex machina. Gold Experience Requiem is, as you probably know, among the strongest stands in all of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Its appearance at the end of part 5 is a highlight of the entire part, seen as one of the most iconic moments of that particular arc. It is also commonly labeled a Deus ex machina, an unfulfilling, sudden development that ends the story abruptly. And on the surface, one can see how that idea would develop. GR happens and the story is immediately over and everything is pretty convenient. And there are specifically 3 core aspects of that moment that I believe lead to that sort of thinking. For one, the beetle arrow, which creates the stand, just magically flies over to Giorno, granting him the ability. Secondly, the ridiculously monstrous ability itself, and lastly, the abrupt and immediate end to the fight once GR appears. And all 3 of these can be seen as an indication of a Deus ex machina if observed without context. But within context, calling them or GR as a whole a Deus ex machina just doesn't hold up. So, because this is what I do, let's go through it one by one. The arrow flying over to Giorno on its own is probably the strongest case for Deus ex machina one can make here. It literally looks like divine intervention, it just magically flies over. But keep in mind, a Deus ex machina is partially defined by both its unpredictability and its unlikeliness. Usually, whatever Deus ex machina is, it doesn't have a precedent. And that doesn't really apply here. The arrows have, ever since their introduction in part 4, shown a clear will of their own. What exactly that will isn't clearly known, but part 5 implies that the virus living on the tip of the arrows, yes, that's a thing, seeks to call life in an attempt to evolve it into its highest form. On a more general level, we can also say that the arrows are, much like rolling stones, guided by the hands of fate. And this is established even before Golden Wind starts. In Diamond Does Not Crash, Yoshihiro's stand arrow just casually decides to pierce Kira mid-breakdown, granting him an additional ability, Bites the Dust. So the arrows gravitating towards those they deem worthy is already an established phenomenon before GR gets created. Alright, but how is Giorno worthy? Is that a Deus Ex Machina? Not really. While the exact criteria towards worthiness are not well known, like everything about the arrows, it is often assumed that it requires a strong will and resolve, even more so for the superior beetle arrow. And as we discussed extensively just a few weeks ago, Giorno is a walking embodiment of resolve, so it's not far-fetched that he'd be worthy. A second object of ire is the ludicrous power of GR. It retains the Life Giver ability it had in its unawakened state and receives a pretty decent power boost. However, the main attraction of the stand is an all-new ability called Return to Zero. This power makes it so that the moment an action against Giorno comes into existence is also the moment in which that action is undone. Furthermore, it allows GR to erase any result from existence, for example erasing Diavolo's death, thus causing the universe to glitch out and loop him dying forever. And at first glance, this is a really over-the-top and convenient power. However, if we take a closer look at it, this aspect too doesn't really support the idea of a Deus Ex Machina. Thanks to Polnareff, we get a look at a second Requiem stand, and indeed, it too possesses a ridiculous and unbeatable power. What's more telling though is the fact that Chariot Requiem is an incomplete Requiem stand. Its user basically dies halfway through its birth, and without the power to control it, Chariot Requiem remains unfinished and unrefined. And even in that state, it is one of the strongest abilities ever shown. So, after seeing that display, it would be reasonable to assume that any completed, fully awakened Requiem stand would not only be even more powerful, but nigh on invincible. Thus, the insane power of GR doesn't really exhibit the unpredictability of a typical Deus Ex Machina, as, considering the pre-existing information, you could have reasonably predicted the power it possesses to be monumental. Being incredible, tide-changing abilities is kind of just the norm for Requiem stands. And that changing of the tides is the last point I want to cover. Once GR appears, the fight is basically instantly over. We get a cool scene of Requiem explaining its power, muda muda, and then it's done. Definitely reminiscent of the convenient immediate endings a Deus Ex Machina offered to Greek theaters. But again, this approach crumbles when put into proper context. The only way to think that the ending to this fight is sudden is to assume that the final fight only starts when Giorno faces Diavolo. This is an assumption that's clearly based around the typical final fight formula where the concluding clash only begins when the main character goes one-on-one with the big bad. But this simply isn't applicable to JoJo. More often than not, a final fight won't be a 1v1, but rather a chase. Part 2's runaway sequence from Cars, or the desperate struggle against Bites the Dust in Part 4 are good examples of that. And that's exactly the case here. Giorno vs Diavolo isn't the final fight, at least not all of it. Rather, the final fight starts with the birth of Chariot Requiem. The entire chase towards the Requiem arrow is the final confrontation, not just the final 1v1 fight. And while, yes, the fight ends very quickly after GR is born, that's kinda what was at stake throughout this entire arc. We are told again and again that he who holds the arrow will be invincible and win, and GR's insane ability and the ease with which it disposes of Diavolo is essentially the payoff to that build-up. Having GR struggle after it receives its ability would have undermined that sort of build-up. The entire point of the Requiem arc was that the arrow is this object of absolute power that has to be gained in order for the story to conclude. In conclusion, I think that looking at these three aspects of GR, it is pretty evident that it's not really a Deus Ex Machina. It operates based on established mechanics of its fictional universe, and its birth and strength get foreshadowed multiple times during the preceding events. But even more importantly, and as we discussed just a few weeks ago, GR is a thematic conclusion to Giorno's journey. I don't want to repeat myself too much, you should really go watch that video, but in essence, Giorno's story is all about the resolve to move forward, to both accept yet oppose fate and to influence reality by actions born of truth. And at the end of his trials, he's rewarded with the ultimate instrument of fate, Gold Experience Requiem. Thank you all for watching, subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this or support me on Patreon, and I'll see you all next time. Take care and be safe. Bye bye!